into marketing and then more into general management. My last big job was the marketing director of the Unipart Group, the automotive parts business. And I was one of the team that actually set Unipart up. And I was responsible for building the Unipart brand in the early days. And we were a kind of disruptor brand, a bit like Red Bull. You know, we were trying to do all the exciting things. So we had a Formula One team for 2 years. The unfortunate thing is it was such a crap team. we only qualified for half the races, because in those days you had to be within 10% of the top qualifying time. So but we were known for doing the best after race parties. So that's what we focused on very much. And we had ballooning and we had powerboat racing and all of that kind of thing. But I became very frustrated in my kind of early 30s, because Unipart had been taken out of British Leyland, and British Leyland was a state-owned business. The culture hadn't really changed. It was still risk-averse, state-owned. Loads of people had been transferred out of BL into Unipart, and I spent 80% of my time defending what I was doing or explaining what I was doing to the internal team, and 20% of my time actually doing my job. So I thought, that's it. So I set up my first business, which was a marketing services company focusing on the automotive aftermarket to start with, but then we grew it and broadened its base. And it was a very successful business, an extremely successful business. And I sold it 12 years later for a lot of money. But today's session is really all about mental health. And I experienced significant stress in the very early days of building my own business, but I'll come back to that. Let me know a little bit more about you guys then. How many of you are the top dog, the CEO, the business owner? How many of you are in that position? So most of you, okay. How many of you have got a management team, more than you, to run the business? Right, okay. And how many of you have got more than 10 employees? No? Okay, so you're all still very small. And who of you have experienced stress in your working life? Good, excellent. So I'm a coach and mentor, and I'm very fortunate. And my wife is a trained psychotherapist, so she's helped me a little bit to kind of understand stress and its impacts. I'm only going to focus on stress. I know that we were talking about mental health, but I want to avoid maybe the more complex mental health issues like depression, because I'm not experienced or qualified enough to talk about those kind of things, whereas I think Neil is. So, what are the causes of stress? They are many and varied. Probably the most significant is high workloads with unrealistic deadlines. And sometimes we set those for ourselves. We set our challenges to an unrealistic level. And on the converse of that, insufficient workload can lead to stress, because people start to think, well, am I being undervalued? Do they not think I'm capable of doing this job? Am I going to lose my job in the very near future? Another reason is poor interpersonal support. If you're working in a team and management is very bad at communicating and motivating and assisting and supporting, that can lead to significant stress. Bullying, harassment, these are other examples in probably slightly larger organizations of how stress can be generated. Concerns over job security, not really understanding where the business is going and where I sit in this and what future do I have in this business. So is this business going to last? Is it going to survive? A poor physical environment, asking people to work in shoddy, worn out locations and environments can again cause stress for the individual employees. A lack of training, asking people to do a job that they're not qualified to or experienced to or even trained to do. That will also, of course, cause stress. And lack of communication, poor communication, which actually all adds up to weak and poor and inefficient management. That's what causes, these are some of the causes. I'm not saying these are all the causes of stress, but these are some of the causes of stress. And what are the effects of stress on you as individuals and your teams? Well, firstly, there's an increase in the propensity to be ill or absent from work. Stress really causes a problem, can generate physical issues as a result, and would lead to increased absenteeism. The other effect of stress is that in the longer term, cognitive processing slows down. You become less efficient. You become less effective. In the short term, stress can have a positive effect. It can actually improve the speed of cognitive processing. But then as it develops and progresses, stress will actually slow it down. It will increase levels of fear and sense of security or insecurity. You'll start to feel worried about yourself and the business. It will lead then to a reduction in productivity and inevitably profitability. So it's something that we all need to be aware of, need to do something about. And if you're in a larger organisation, stress can be contagious. It can actually spread from one employee to another because people talk. And if people have their own concerns as part of their levels of stress, then that can actually spread across the organisation, and more people can begin to experience stress. So let's go back to my experience. I did really well in the first 2 years. Sales rocketed, I was making big profits. But after about 2.5 years, things started to flatline. And then they started to decline. And I became more and more stressed. I had a friend who was a qualified management accountant who was doing my quarterly accounts. And he came to me one day and he said, Mike, I think you're missing a trick. And I said, what do you mean? He said, I think you need a coach. I said, well, I've had 20 years at the top level in really big corporates, Hotpoint, ITT, Unipart, Andrews Little Salts. What am I going to learn from a coach? What can a coach teach me? He said, well, you've only ever been involved at a very senior level in very large organisations with massive kind of infrastructures. You've got a finance department, an HR department, a product development, an engineering department, a manufacturing department. Now you are everything. You are the finance department. You are the HR department. You are the new business development department. You're everything. And what you really need is the benefit of somebody's experience and expertise, somebody who's walked that walk and who can come and help you avoid making the mistakes and reduce the stress, because a problem shared is a problem halved. So he introduced me to a guy and we got on instantly. And I worked with this guy for the next 9 years of my business journey. And it was the single best decision I ever made in the running of that business. So we grew it to £3.5 million turnover. We were employing 12 people, making, I won't tell you how much, but lots. And then somebody knocked on the door and said, we'd like to buy the business. And they made us an offer that we simply just couldn't refuse. And then I went on to run 2 more businesses, but I kept my coach with me. He came on my journey. And he made such a major difference. And what did he do? How did he work? Well, basically, we sat down a couple of times a month, usually over lunch, for a couple of hours, and we just looked at the issues that we were facing. What were the biggest challenges that we were having to address within the organisation? And what he helped me to do was to learn about insight, increasing my insight in my understanding of my business and how my business worked, and how the people that I was employing, and I was growing my team at that time, how I could make sure that they made the most significant contribution that they could to the growth and development of the business. It helped me to improve my planning. It increased my self-confidence. I felt more capable of running the business now because I had this guy sitting on my shoulder. It allowed me to acquire new skills. I thought I had all the skills, all the business skills I needed, but I needed a whole new set of skills to run this small business. And it allowed me to exercise greater control over the business. So, what are the best ways of avoiding stress in your kind of work life? And the first thing, and this is something that he focused on very much at the very beginning, was balance your workload. Make sure that you are creating enough time to get away from the business. We call it work-life balance. But make sure that you plan your activities so that you have within your diary spaces that you can walk away, enjoy something else, take away the pressure, reduce the stress. The second thing is if you've got staff, and this is to reduce stress within your staff, is to kind of match their workload with their capabilities and personalities. I had a PA in my business, and what I found was if I gave her a load of work, here's that, right, load of work, she would collapse, absolutely collapse. Yet if I gave it to her one bit at a time, she was unbelievable. So I learned about her capabilities and her approach, and I managed her in a way that optimized the return that I was getting from that member of staff. Allow employees to have control over what they do as much as you possibly can. Involve them. Listen to them. Provide manageable deadlines. Don't give unrealistic deadlines to people that you have working for you, because that will just create stress. In larger organizations, we would also allow flexi time. Let people work around their own personal and social responsibilities, particularly women who have small children. Very important that we recognize that they have another life, and that we have to build our kind of work life and work patterns around their lives, and allow remote networking and remote working. There's nothing wrong with remote working. If people have got clear targets to meet, give them responsibility to kind of manage their time and work from wherever they need to work, but make sure that they're meeting their targets. So you kind of, it's a management skill that. Create a clear leadership structure as well. That's the other thing. Lots of businesses don't have clarity over structure. Most of the clients that I'm currently working with, when I arrived, didn't have a management structure. They didn't have a means of communicating. There weren't levels. And so having a clear leadership structure helps you to improve communication. And make sure that communication isn't just a one-way process. It has to be a two-way process. Allow people to communicate to you as well as you communicate to them, face-to-face, in groups. Also, make sure that if the business is going through change, don't hide that. Don't hide the fact that you're going to change things. Communicate that, explain it to the members of staff, because if rumours can start, if they pick up a piece here and a piece there, rumours will start, and you're then going to create situations where people feel stress. Create a sense of loyalty to your staff. Give them career development opportunities if you possibly can. And if you make a commitment to your staff, individually or as a group, make sure that you deliver that commitment. Don't make promises that you can't keep. Don't make commitments that you will eventually fail in delivering them. And also, take an interest in their lives. That's very important. Show that you're interested in them as people, as well as members of your staff. Engage employees as much as you possibly can. Recognise and reward them for good achievement. Very, very important. Set realistic targets and then reward their achievement. Establish zero tolerance for harassment. Do not allow anybody within the organisation to harass any of the other employees. And make sure that if there is conflict, if two employees are not getting on, you need to manage that. You need to make sure that whole process, that whole situation has to be managed, because if it isn't, it will create a very stressful environment. And finally, consult. Ask them what they think. Allow them to contribute to strategic and operational decisions. The starting point for my coaching is we do a thing called the Orbit Vision, which is a 3-year vision for the business. It's 4 concentric circles. The inner being the where we are now circle, the outer being where we'd like to be in 3 years' time. We then put measurement spokes into that wheel, so we decide how we're going to measure progress for the business. We then put these into the orbit wheel, and then what we do is we start at the inner circle, so where are we now? We put a value against each of these measurements, and then we go to the outer circle, and using post-it notes we put down some values where we'd like to be against all of these measures, and then we work inwards, so from year 3 to year 2 to year 1. But the key thing is to make this most successful, to make it work most effectively, is to involve everybody in that whole process. Everybody who has a responsibility for delivering the plan should be involved in that strategic visioning process, because it's the great way of getting buy-in. It's a great way of getting people committed. It's a fantastic way of avoiding stress. So that's my little talk done with. How are we doing time-wise?
Another 10 minutes.
We've got 10 minutes.
Yep.
Well, I was
Yep.
going to leave 10 minutes for us to
Yeah.
maybe have any questions that you might, or do with any questions that you've got, guys. Yeah?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, with an individual who's running their own business, that's a very lonely place to be. That's what I've found very early on. Boy, it's so lonely.
But you get that with in any hierarchical structure, where you
Yeah.
get somebody at the top. I mean, being ex-military, you've got your commission levels, then you come down.
Yes.
And of course, when you are put in charge of a group of people,
Yes.
you have to distance yourself from them.
You do.
You've got to have a leadership structure,
Mm.
but you've got to be not seen above them, but seen in a different light to them as the person
Yes.
they can come to when they have a problem. And then you need that support network. And the thing is, when you're at the top, you don't always have that support network.
No.
And I was talking to Neil there, and we were having a chat before
Mm.
about how having other people you can turn to may not be actually within your organisation, but other people you can call upon.
Yeah.
So a coach is not part of your organisation,
No.
but he's there to help and guide.
Absolutely.
As we were talking about there, having somebody you can go to if there is an issue on the mental health side of life,
Mm.
on the stress side of life,
Mhm.
there's so many different things.
Mhm.
You've got somebody you can go and talk to.
Yes.
Just be a friend of somebody as well.
Well, that's essentially what a coach or a mentor is. It's a critical friend. It's somebody who sits on your shoulder, who you can share your innermost kind of thoughts and fears and issues.
Mm-hmm.
But then they've got no extra ground. They just want you to succeed. And they can see the wood for the trees. They're not involved in the day-to-day. They can actually stand back and look at it and think, well, I mean, this is what happened. I mean, we would have over lunch, I would say to him, look, I've got a problem with employee retention. I've just had an accounts executive who I employed 2 years ago. I've given her 3 accounts to work on. And what's happened is she's up and left with those 3 accounts. How can I deal with that? How do I stop that? Because I can't write restrictive employment contracts because they won't stand up in law anymore. European Court of Human Rights will not allow those clauses, those restrictive clauses, because it's a constraint of trade.
Yeah.
You're stopping somebody earning a living, so you can't do that anymore. You really can't.
No, but the coach is there not to actually tell you what to do.
Well, he gave me some suggestions.
Yeah, but what they'll do is they'll guide you.
Yes, they'll guide
They
you.
won't tell you.
Oh, no,
Guide
no.
you. At the end of the day, you've got to
Here are
work it
some
out yourself.
options.
Yeah.
Yes.
And go and see which best suits
Yeah.
what you actually require to do.
Well, we looked at a number of options, and the options we came up with was a share option scheme.
Mm-hmm.
So for those people that we really valued in the business, we gave them an option of buying X amount of the shares. They didn't buy them today, but they all knew that the long-term plan was to sell the business, and at the point when you sell it, the day before they buy their shares at the agreed rate, and then when we sell the shares, they benefit from the new share price. And that really, really worked. And I hadn't any idea of how that would work. But that was the idea that the coach came up with. You know, this is a thought,
Yeah.
as you say, Stuart. Don't do this, but these are some ideas, some options.
I think people also need to understand there's a difference between a coach and a mentor.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, for me, a mentor deals on a one-to-one basis. It's just usually with the chief executive, so it's somebody who works with the top guy. Whereas a coach tends to work with the senior team, either as a group or individually with senior
I tend to
people.
find, I mean, I've got a mentor who I use
Yes,
for certain things, but it's more of a sounding board.
yes, that's what a mentor is.
Yeah. Whereas a coach is more of a
It's more knowledge transfer, it's more training, it's more development, it's more kind of, yeah. So, but I do both. I'm qualified to do both. So, but my focus and my reason to go down that route was because I was bloody stressed. You know, I was, and I mean, it was an incredibly stressful. You know, even though the organisation grew and I had a group of 4 who were sitting below me in my structure, I was still the person carrying the can financially. You know, when it was a limited company, but even so, my wage bill every month was 37 grand. Now that meant I had to
You
generate.
pay yourself a bit there, didn't you?
That's before I got paid. That was before I didn't get paid until everybody else got paid.
Which is the norm, yeah.
Which is the norm. You don't, as a business owner, the last person who gets paid is you. And when you've got 12 hungry mouths, that's a lot of business you've got to generate every month. And you've got to make sure that the cash flow is managed properly, and you collect them, debts are collected on time, and all of those kinds of things. And that was bloody stressful, and I couldn't have coped with that stress without this guy sitting on my shoulder, because he was guiding me. He was taking that stress away. So it was a very effective and very worthwhile relationship. Yeah. Yes. So anybody else got any kind of comments or any thoughts or?
could waffle all day on this.
Well, yeah, I could, you know, I didn't want to open up into depression, but
No.
it's a lovely day.
It's one of the things being here, we were talking earlier on about depression,
Yeah.
and the fact that actually a lot of people aren't depressed at all. They don't
No,
understand what depression
They're
is.
overstressed, aren't they?
They're overstressed. They're just, as for want of a better term, they're pissed off,
Mm.
and they're not seeing the wood from the trees. Whereas
Mm.
having somebody else external can help.
Mm.
And I think one of the big problems with stress when people get too stressed is time management.
Yeah.
Looking at what you're actually trying to achieve.
Mm.
As you said earlier,
Mm.
don't try to overachieve or put too much pressure on yourself to
Absolutely.
do something.
Absolutely.
And the old acronym SMART, people
Yeah.
don't use it effectively.
And learn to
Use it.
delegate as well.
Exactly.
Learn to kind of offload stuff that
Yeah.
doesn't need your expertise or your kind of
Well, I think
your
a lot
skill.
of micro small businesses, especially when they're one or two employees try to do everything themselves, don't collaborate with people. Use
No.
external agencies to do
Mm.
things
Yeah.
that maybe you don't have the skill. Don't worry about giving a little bit away.
No,
We'll
no,
talk
that's
about
right.
later.
Yeah. Well, that's a form of delegation, really, isn't
It
it?
is,
It's
yeah.
kind of-
But as you say, yeah, you're delegating,
Mm.
but you're putting that out to other people.
Yeah.
And don't be scared of it. Some people try
No,
to keep
no.
everything themselves down.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's enough work to go around all of us.
Absolutely right. Yes. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
So anybody got any work for me?
Any other thoughts?